permission, Jesus, we ask you to help us to learn and to share, to be formed, and to live your teachings on spiritual maternity, especially for our priests. And I'd like to start with the gospel reading again. Since Monsignor didn't talk about it too much, it does apply to what we're doing here. So, the apostles gathered together with Jesus and reported all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." People were coming and going in great numbers, and they had no opportunity even to eat. So they went off in the boat by themselves to a deserted place. When we had our first event like this, which was at St. Elizabeth of Hungary, I believe it was 2014, if I'm remembering correctly, as we prayed about how we should have the morning go, we had a strong sense that Our Lady was inviting us to rest and be formed in her heart, and that she wanted us to come away by ourselves for a time to rest with her. So I was really happy when I saw that that was the reading for today. So how God in his ways can give us just what we need at the right time. So I'm going to move the book. So my name's Joni Hasser, and together with Gloria Del Rosario, who's our worker bee back there somewhere, we formed the Apostolate of Spiritual Motherhood for the Sanctification of Priests in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. The apostolate was inspired by this document from the Congregation for the Clergy. It's called Eucharistic Adoration for the Sanctification of Priests and Spiritual Maternity. We have copies of this available. St. Joseph Radio has them for purchase. You can also order them from the internet, but it's a little cheaper if you get them in bulk, so we have a bunch of them back there. They're also available as a PDF on the internet, although the internet version has less pages. In 2012, they contracted with Roman Catholic Books to make this version, so they added a few more pages. But this booklet is what inspired us. And what the Congregation for the Clergy was asking of every bishop in the world is to start cenacles or chapels of perpetual adoration so that people can go and pray for the sanctification of their priests. They saw that more than anything, what priests needed in this day was spiritual support. The priests needed their identity to be built on that intimacy with Jesus so that they could become and be Jesus for us and call us to live the gospel. And they needed our spiritual support, so that prayer is so important. And then they also were looking at different stories of different women who, in a very unique and special way as the Spirit led them, lived what they called spiritual maternity for the sanctification of priests. And in this document, there's a collection of beautiful stories that are so inspiring of how women were called, some in miraculous ways and some in simple, humble ways, to support our priests. So we encourage you to read that. And then I also want to welcome all of you here. As of last night, we had women from 24 different parishes, and I know there's a few more of you that didn't sign up, so we maybe even have more than that. This is the spiritual motherhood for priests is described as a vocation within a vocation. And those of you who are here, I'm sure most of you have this experience where you just have this drawing in your heart. It starts with an awareness of who we are as the Father, God our Father, the most awesome God's beloved daughters, that we can rest in his fatherhood for us, that we can lean into him, know that he's there, he cares for us, he provides for us. And out of that flows an awareness of our sisterhood to all of his other sons and daughters, that we have gifts to share with them, and they have gifts for us, and we want to be there for each other. And then coming from there is this also awareness of our bridegroom, our dear Jesus, our bridegroom. He's the bridegroom of the church. And as women, we have a receptivity that we can be open to him as bridegroom. And as you think about it, when we're called into the sacramental marriage, out of that union as bride and bridegroom comes new life. And that's why the church is called Mother Church, because the church brings forth new life. So as women, we can have a special maternity for others. We can nourish and nurture their spiritual life by how we live, how we pray, how we offer our sufferings, our sacrifices, our sorrows, our joys. All can be done in union with Jesus through the Holy Spirit in Mary's heart to bring life to others. And it's a selfless giving of life that we're called to give. You know, I mean, we can kind of be sort of like these needy mothers that feel good when our kids do well, and when they do it, they obey us and clean our houses for us. But we don't want to be like that. We want to be the mothers who lay down our lives humbly, silently, quietly, to give life to others. And we know that God blesses us when we do that. So we're going to try to learn more about spiritual maternity for our priests, and learn how to live that. We also want you to know a little bit about the program for the day. So we are already into the welcome announcements. And then Msgr Mitas will speak to us. His topic is, Your Mother and Your Brothers Are Here. I'm anxious to hear what he has to say about that. I know recently at the daily Mass reading, we had that reading about the people saying, hey, Jesus, your mother and your brothers want to talk to you. And then I'm sure Msgr will tell us more about that. So let's hear what he has to say soon. And then we also want you to know that we will have a period of silence after his talk. I will explain a little bit more after that about our spiritual adoption program in St. Louis. When Gloria and I met each other, realized we had a similar drawing towards this vocation within a vocation, we wanted to share with all of you what this is and how to live it. So we prayed for our priest to be our spiritual director, and we were given our dear Father Chris Martin, who's such a gift. And he helped us think about how we could promote this in our archdiocese. We had a vision of wanting every priest in our archdiocese to have at least 1, 2 or 3 would be nice, spiritual mothers just for him, who would carry him and pray for him. And we thought there would be a certain detachment and less worry on our part if these ladies really know how to do this, if we had it anonymous. So the women who are part of our adoption program don't know the name of their priest, but that doesn't matter. God knows who it is. And some of us have named them, like I call him the priest entrusted to my heart, or I sometimes call him Father William. Sorry if that's not your name, Father. But, some of them call him Father George or Father, they make up names. But there's a story in here about a woman who was all set to, this woman, when she was a girl, her pastor taught her about offering her prayers and works for one soul. And only our Lord was to know who that one soul was, so she started doing that. Well, so it turns out that there was a young man who was kind of influenced by the world. He wanted to be a lawyer and be influential. And during this time of prayer, Jesus appeared to him with his Sacred Heart exposed, and there was a nun kneeling there, and Jesus said, "She prays unremittingly for you." Well, that whole experience changed his heart, his life. He entered seminary, became a priest, and became a bishop in Germany in the 1800s, Bishop Kettler. Well, years later, one of his friends was asking him about his successful apostolate, and he explained to him about this apparition that he had and how that he owes all of his success to this one nun, and he had never met her. Well, it just turned out that these 2 bishops were invited to a convent to say Mass, and here she was. She's coming up to communion, and his face turns white. He's like, oh my gosh, like she looked exactly like this apparition. So after Mass, of course, he wanted to meet her, and Mother Superior called all the nuns, and he's looking around, and she wasn't there. Mother Superior, are they all here? Oh no, that one sister that works in the barn, I'm sorry, she gets kind of caught up in her work. So the sister brought her to the bishop, and he met with her privately, and as he's speaking with her, he learned that she had a special devotion to the Sacred Heart, that she had learned about this offering all of her prayers and works for one soul, that she offered her holy hour and her work in the barn, which, yes, Bishop, it's very hard, and I don't really enjoy it, but I learned to offer that suffering, that work in the suffering in my work for my one soul. And then he asked her, well, sister, how old are you? Well, she was 33. Have you noticed how God likes that 33? And it turns out that her birthday, the day she took her first breath, was the very day that he had that apparition. So God took all of what she did and applied it outside of time, how God can, to the soul. Well, to us that was really encouraging, just to think we don't have to know who this is. We just be faithful and God will give the grace. So that's a little bit about our anonymous program. We're going to have an opportunity for the women who would like to adopt the next priest on our list, which actually we have enough that each has one now. So we'll give you a chance to sign our book after our rosary, and then I'll give you a prayer card. The prayers are written by Dom Mark Kirby, who is the prior of a monastery in Ireland now, of priests and brothers who devote their lives to praying for the sanctification of priests. But he wrote these beautiful prayers, so we'll give you a copy of that, and then Monsignor will give you a little blessing if you'd like to join our apostolate in that anonymous adoption program today. If you've already adopted a priest, don't come up again. Don't sign the book again. If you're not sure, we have your names. You can ask Gloria. So I think we'll move on to the next part of our program, which will be Monsignor Mitas. So for those of you who don't know Monsignor Mitas, I understand that he grew up in South St. Louis. I don't know what high school he went to.
Seminary.
Oh, he went to seminary high school. That's cool. Okay. But he attended St. Francis de Sales Parish growing up. And then he entered Cardinal Glennon College and Kenrick Seminary. And then as a transitional deacon, he served at St. Edward Parish. As an associate pastor, he served at St. Simon, Transfiguration, Immaculate Conception in Arnold, St. Thomas the Apostle, St. Gerard Majella, and St. Genevieve in St. Genevieve. And as pastor, he served at Immaculate Conception in Union and here at St. Angela Merici. So if you add all that up, you know he's been a priest for a long time. He was actually ordained in 1979 by Archbishop John Cardinal Carberry. So we're excited to have him speak with us. And if you haven't had a chance to read his column, he does write in the St. Louis Review under the Dear Father feature. Are you still doing that? I haven't noticed your writing lately. Well, he did do it. So it's on the internet. You can find it. So, Monsignor?
Well, thank you, Joan, and thank you all for coming today to the wilds of North St. Louis County. It's great to see you all here today. A particular treat to see our religious sisters here. What a blessing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but you are right now sitting in downtown Shoveltown. I remember years ago, I guess when I was in Union, I used to listen to the radio in the car, and they had a guy who was the weathercaster, and he'd always say, and it's 28 degrees in Webster Groves, and it's 30 degrees in Ladue, and it's 29 degrees in Belleville, and it's 30 degrees in Shoveltown. And I thought he was making that up until I was assigned to this parish. I Googled the map, and right there, right on top of this where you're sitting, it has the word Shoveltown. There really is a Shoveltown, and you are in it right now. There's a couple of stories about how that happened, but we don't need to go into that kind of stuff. The spiritual motherhood of priests is a wonderful thing. I don't know if you remember the old John Wayne movie, The Quiet Man, one of his best. He goes back to Ireland, and he meets Maureen O'Hara and gets married. Well, Maureen O'Hara's brother is Squire Danaher, and he is interested in wooing the widow to learn. And so at John Wayne and Maureen O'Hara's wedding, after the nuptials, he makes this very clumsy speech in which he's trying to reach out to the widow to learn to start the courtship process. And he begins by saying, "Where would any man be without a woman? And he looks around and he sees Father Lonigan, of course, who does not have a woman, so he's kind of off balance. He says, even Father Lonigan had a mother. And he says, what do you expect? That's a great line. Anyway, every priest needs a mother. That's a wonderful thing. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the spiritual motherhood of priests. I chose as the text the story, which I'm sure you're well familiar with, where, and Mark is very, very terse about this. He's very blunt. Remember, there's the gospel we heard a couple of Saturdays ago, where Mary and Jesus' brothers, we'll talk more about that in a minute, come to get Jesus because they thought he was crazy. They thought he was out of his mind. Shocking, that they would think this, especially the Blessed Mother, and yet this is what St. Mark tells us. I could go deeper into that. That's not our subject today. Apparently Jesus was so radically different from when he was in Nazareth growing up to after his baptism and his time in the desert that he caught everybody off guard. He went back to Nazareth, and they were, where did he get all this from? They couldn't believe in him. He couldn't perform any miracles there because of their lack of faith. He blew them away completely. But the whole idea is that Mary shows up with the brothers of Jesus, and Jesus basically, you would think he would say, oh, hey, folks, here's my mom. Here, give her a hand, folks. Here, Mom, stand up. Oh, no, that kind of thing. No, it didn't happen. He's sort of just the opposite. It's almost like he's blowing her off. Well, my mother? Well, who is my mother? Those who hear the word of God and practice it. They are mother and sister and brother to me. And it sounds at first glance like a put down to the Blessed Mother, but it really isn't. And we'll get more into that in a little bit. But let's unpack that story. Your mother and your brothers are here. We clearly know that Mary is Jesus' mother. Biologically, in every conceivable way, Mary is Jesus' mother. But who are these brothers? This is where it gets a little bit murky. The Greek word for brother is adelphos. The Greek word for love is philia. You put those two together, you get Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. Now, an adelphos is a male who has the same mom and dad that you have. That's exactly what the word adelphos means, a brother, a literal brother, Now, it can mean, in an extracted sense, a close relative of some kind, a cousin. It can also mean somebody you're very familiar with. One time I had a guy refer to me as my brother from a different mother. And I go, oh, okay. And it took me a while to figure out what he's talking about, but that's kind of nice. And so a lot of people have said that, adelphos is the word they usually use for a cousin. And, well, no, it really isn't. Because anepsios is the word that means cousin, and that's the word they use, because that's what a cousin is, an anepsios. But the gospel writers relate that they said, your brothers are here. Probably, and this is speculation too, we don't know for sure, there's a legend, and it makes sense, that these are actually the children of Joseph by his first wife. Apparently Joseph was a widower, that's another legend, and that these would have been Jesus' stepbrothers, which does kind of make a bit more sense. What the truth is, we don't really know. But the whole idea is that it's a very important doctrine in the church. We talk about Blessed Mary, ever virgin. That she gave birth to Jesus in one of the most marvelous mysteries of all time. A contradiction. How can a woman give birth and still be a virgin? Well, she was. That's why the burning bush has always been the symbol of the Blessed Mother. Here's a bush that is really on fire and is really not being consumed by the fire. And yet it really is on fire. It's a contradiction. God's perfect calling card. That God is mysterious. He's hard for us to figure out. He's hard for us to understand. And so it's not surprising that we have this. But the point is that for us, the Blessed Mother is a mother too, but her maternity is spiritual. That's why it's very important that she does not have any other children, because the maternity of the rest of us is purely a spiritual thing, a spiritual reality, a spiritual matter. And we see this most dramatically at the foot of the cross, where, John is there, John the beloved disciple and the Blessed Mother. And Jesus basically gives St. John over to his mother's care. Woman, behold your son. This is where the spiritual adoption of priests comes in, right? John had just been ordained a priest a couple days earlier at the Last Supper, and now he's entrusting her to his own mother to be his own. A spiritual mother, not a biological mother, of course, but a spiritual one. And the way that really matters the most, we talk about DNA, and you know what DNA is. It's the thing that constitutes you to be what you are. Every cell in your body has DNA, and that's why theoretically they can take any cell of your body and clone it and make a new you, a Xerox of you, as it were. And if someone were able to take the DNA of Mozart, for example, and put it in every cell of your body, you would turn into Mozart. That's just kind of how this works. And for the Jews, that kind of thing was very, very important. To be a Jew, to even be reckoned a Jew, you had to be descended from Abraham. You had to have Abraham's actual DNA in your system. You had to be from Father Abraham. This is the way it is. And that seemed to be the most important thing. It didn't make any difference how faithful you were, how pious, how whatever. If you didn't have Abraham's DNA, you were not the chosen people, da-da-da-da-da-da. St. Paul kind of blows this out of the water, His particular dilemma, and he writes about this in his letter to the Romans, is that you got all these Jews who've been waiting for the Messiah to come. When he finally shows up, they ignore him, they blow him off. In fact, they persecute him. Whereas all these Gentiles who are outside the covenant, they're jumping on with both feet. They're getting on this boat and really happy to be there. And it bothers him. Why are my people rejecting Christ? And why are these pagans, these Gentiles, embracing him? This is a terrible thing. And then he grapples with the whole issue, and he says, really what we're talking about here is what it means to be a Jew. And again, the definition was you're descended from Abraham. You could be the biggest scumbag, the biggest, least faithful person around. If you're descended from Abraham, you're a Jew. That's all that mattered. We talk about the ethnic Jews, people who don't believe, but they've got the DNA. Is this really what makes you a Jew? And then he asked the question, well, Abraham was a Jew. Was he descended from Abraham? Well, no, how could he be? He is Abraham, What is it that made Abraham a Jew? And it was, of course, faith. And more specific than that, grace. Because when we talk about grace, we're talking about really God's own DNA. The thing that constitutes us for what we are, that transforms us. I cannot take Mozart's DNA and put it in your cells. It'd be interesting if I could. You could do wonderful things if I did, but it simply cannot be done. But the whole idea is that God has taken his own DNA, his sanctifying grace, and put it in each one of us. And this is what really spiritual adoption is all about. The idea that somehow or another we can, by our prayers for other people, improve their existence, improve their state in this world. It's a transmission of grace. The grace, of course, comes from God. We do not do anything to earn it. That's why it's called grace. It's a gift, something we cannot earn, something we really don't deserve. But it's amazing how when by our prayers we really do support those, entrusted to our care. And the whole idea, my brothers and sisters, mostly sisters here I see, is that by the spiritual adoption of priests, what you're doing is specifically asking God for that special grace, the grace to be, fruitful in vocation. Let's talk about that for a minute. The whole idea is that, my brothers and sisters, where do vocations come from? Over the years, different dioceses have tried some crazy things to get vocations. I remember back in the 70s, the Jesuits had a very slick ad campaign in Time magazine. They were advertising in Time magazine for vocations. And it was very slick. It was very well done, as of course you'd expect from the Jesuits. And there was a brand of whiskey or scotch or something called Dewars, D-E-W-A-R-S. And so they made a pun out of that, D-O-hyphen-E-R-S. We are doers, And it showed all these Jesuits doing wonderful things. And like I say, Time magazine at the time had a tremendous circulation. It was a very slick ad campaign, and it did not work at all. Back in the 90s, there was a diocese in Delaware that actually advertised on MTV for vocations. You picture that, I can just picture some guy at 3 in the morning watching MTV going, dude, be a priest, man, all right. I could just picture the phone calls they must have gotten, But did they really get any vocations? No, they did not. Hate to say it, but back, I guess, in the 80s, our own vocation office had a run for vocations in Forest Park. They had all these little nuns in jogging suits going around Forest Park, and the Review had pictures of them the next issue and all this kind of thing. Yeah, very sweet, Did it work? No, not at all. The only thing that works in getting vocations is what Jesus taught us. Why don't we listen to Jesus, for crying out loud? Jesus said, the harvest is great, but the laborers are scarce. Beg the harvest master to send laborers to gather his harvest. You get vocations through prayer. That's where it comes from. That and nothing else. I can tell you the story. 4 priests I know personally, they've all passed on now, but they can tell the exact same story. Back when they were being delivered, it was a rough go. And the doctor went into the waiting room, or the father's room, and he said, I don't know if you guys are praying men or not. I don't know if you're a believer, but it's really touch and go in there. I could lose the baby. So Dad went down into the chapel at the hospital and started praying and said, God, if you let the child be born, if he's a boy, I'll give him to you as a priest. 4 priests I know can tell that exact same story. One is really weird. I say weird, not weird. I mean marvelous. You make the call. He was a member of the class of '63 from Kenrick, and the doctor comes in and said, "Look, I could lose both of them. It's really touch and go in there. It's a rough delivery. I could lose both mom and dad." Dad goes into the chapel, says, "I'll give him to you as a priest if he's born okay." Everything worked out fine. The boy is born, goes to the seminary. Dad dies before he's ordained. 2 weeks after he's ordained, he and his mom go someplace he's going to offer Mass. On the way back, he's on the railroad tracks. He's hit by a train. Both of them are killed. God kept his deal. 2 weeks surplus. Wow. Talk about interesting stuff. I tell you, I really believe, this is my own, this is not doctrine, this is not the church teaching, this is just my own observation of things. I really think the reason why we have a vocation crisis, and let's face it, it's not just the priesthood and religious life, it's marriage too. I mean, so many of our young people aren't even bothering to get married and not staying married, once they do. It's shameful, we have so many people having their 50th and 60th wedding anniversaries. How many are having a 25th? Not many. That's really part of the problem. But I really think the main reason why the path to the seminary is dried up is because mothers have stopped praying for their sons to become priests. They're having fewer kids, they want grandkids, and the rest. They just simply have stopped praying for God to take their sons as priests. I know it's not an easy thing to give up a son to the priesthood. My mother went through that. She gave me up, and here I am. I'm glad she did. It's a wonderful. But the thing is, I know that I'm here because of my mother's prayers. And she's my biological mother. I have her DNA, etc., etc. But the spiritual motherhood is, I think, just as effective, just as important. After all, on the cross, Jesus gave not just St. John, but every priest, I believe, his own mother to be our spiritual mother. And it's so much nicer when we have ladies such as yourselves who are willing to take up the cause. Apparently, the Blessed Mother became part of the apostolic band. We see her there on Pentecost in the upper room, and we kind of lose track of it because the history of the church doesn't record much of anything. But it seems that would be a natural thing, that St. John took care of her, and she, of course, took care of him spiritually. As my brothers and sisters, it is. Mary is the Blessed Mother, ever virgin. Because her maternity over us is to be a spiritual thing, not a biological one. And her prayers for us are because she is our mother, not in a literal, biological sense, but in the way that really matters the most, in that spiritual thing. When Jesus said that, who is my mother and brothers is those who hear the word and put it into practice, frankly, ask the question, who better heard his words and put them into practice than the Blessed Mother? Well, nobody, So it looks like a put down of the Blessed Mother is actually an exaltation, a raising up, saying, well, here she is. I mean, she's the one we're talking about, that she truly is my mother biologically, but in the way that counts the most is someone who is personally holy. And I guess that's what it comes down to, doesn't it? We have an example in the church of the power of mother's prayers in St. Monica. You all know the story of Monica, I'm sure. She had this father, her husband was, a bon vivant, I guess that's the nicest way of putting it. She finally prayed him into the church. He was baptized and, right before he died. But she had this son, Augustine, who was really a sharp cookie. I mean, this guy was clever, he was smart, he had all the things going for him, and yet he was walking in his father's footsteps. He fathered an illegitimate son, named him Adeodatus, which means given by God, as if he had nothing to do with it, Interesting. And but she kept praying for him constantly, praying and nagging, and crying, and following him around, And for 20 years, prayed for this kid to straighten out. Even took him to Milan to hear the great St. Ambrose, figuring if he hears St. Ambrose talk, he will surely turn around. St. Ambrose had such great eloquence that when he preached at his cathedral, parents would not let their daughters go to Mass because he would speak so beautifully about the life of a consecrated virginity, they all want to become nuns. And again, we had the same problem in the 4th century we have today, parents not wanting to give up their children. Nonetheless, St. Augustine finally did turn around, and the prayers and the tears of St. Monica were successful. It took a long time, but in all those 20 years or so of praying, look what happened to her. She became a very holy woman as well. In fact, when the missionaries first got out to California, they were naming things after saints, Santa Barbara, San Francisco, et cetera, et cetera. And they came to a place where there was a constant little waterfall of trickle. They called it St. Monica. It reminded them of the tears of St. Monica being shed for her son Augustine. Dear ladies, don't be surprised if one of the best fruits of your prayers in spiritual motherhood is your own sanctification. The prayers that you say will help us fantastically, and we appreciate that and thank you for it. But don't be too caught off guard if they redound to your own benefit as well. It's wonderful the way grace operates, isn't it? And so, dear ladies, I thank you on behalf of my brother priests for your coming this morning. We appreciate all your prayers for us because, like I say, vocations are the fruit of prayers. The sustenance of vocation are also the fruit of prayers. As long as we have people who are willing to pray for vocations, as long as people willing to give their children for vocations, as long as we have people willing to adopt priests for vocations, we will have holy priests. Because let's face it, is it important that we have intelligent priests? Oh, yeah. Is it important that we have well-educated priests? Well, yeah. But it's most important that we have holy priests. That's the most important thing. I think it's tremendously ironic that the man who is the patron saint of parish priests, this is the priest the Catholic Church holds up, this is the guy that you parish priests need to be like, was an idiot. I'm talking about St. John Vianney, right? This man was so stupid, he flunked out of the seminary, I think 3 times, something like that. He couldn't get Latin down. But there was something about him. He was a very holy man. In fact, there's a great line where he was in Latin class one day, and he just wasn't getting the declensions. He just wasn't getting it. And the priest was so exasperated, he said, "Vianney, you are an ass." And Vianney said, "Well, Father, what you said is true. I am an ass. I know that. But just think, if the Lord through Samson can slay 1,000 men with the jawbone of an ass, just think what he can do with a whole ass." Well, he did great marvels, you know. Gianni had no pretensions. I mean, he was like Forrest Gump, you know. The guy just, great things happened wherever he went because he had no pretensions. He plagiarized every sermon he ever gave. He didn't say they were his sermons. He read them out of a sermon manual. And ironically, right after he died, somebody gathered up all his sermons and published them. You know, it's great. He had a weak voice. You know, there was a story once. There was a lawyer from Paris who had lost his religion, and he made the great trip to Ars for the weekend, came back a convinced Catholic. And so his friend said, "What happened?" He said, "What did that man say?" I said, "I don't know. I couldn't hear him. He had a weak voice. I was in the back of church. But there's something about him personally that changed him around. You went to confession to this man. He changed you completely. Not a particularly intelligent guy, but an extremely holy priest. And because he was holy, he was there in the person of Christ. That's the most important thing." Again, talk about ironies. I happened to be born on his feast day. And I became a parish priest. I've often wondered what it would be like if I'd been born on the feast of the patron saint of axe murderers, if my life would have taken a different turn. But it's not August 4th, which is his feast day now. It was a different day when I was born. So my sisters, you dear wonderful ladies, thank you so much for your spiritual motherhood, your willingness to take on this task. And it's not going to be easy, you know, saying your prayers every day for people you don't even know. It's so much, you know, easier. You know, Jesus said, "Pray for your enemies." That's tough enough. But to pray for somebody you don't know, that can be very, very arduous as well. Would he ever know that you're praying for him? Well, you know, no, probably not in this world. But it's a very important thing, and God bless you for it. And on behalf of all my brother priests, I thank you.